Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks, what if both people in a romantic relationship are narcissistic? So that's kind of the overarching question, but then I see some more specific questions related to this. Are two narcissists more likely to find each other and become a couple? I've also seen this same question worded with the term dark triad traits instead of narcissism. So are two people with dark triad traits more likely to find each other and become a couple? Another question here related to narcissism would be, what would that relationship look like? Would it succeed? And what about the different types of narcissism, meaning grandiose versus vulnerable? How do they relate to one another in terms of the success and failure of this type of relationship? So on the first question here, are they more likely to become a couple? Are two narcissists more likely to become a couple? Well, to understand this, we have to understand the idea of what's called non-random coupling, also referred to as assortative mating. Positive assortment is when people who are similar become couples. So in short, people that are like one another. Negative assortment is when the characteristics of each person in the couple are complementary. In short, opposites. Another way to put this is similarity versus complementarity. Now we know in romantic relationships there is a lot of evidence for positive assortment. We see positive assortment around variables like age, political preference, religious beliefs, education, intelligence, values, and personality traits. The most relevant of those categories to this question around narcissism, of course, would be the personality traits. If we look at the 5-factor model of personality, we see the strongest positive assortment around openness, then agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Interestingly, we don't see consistent findings around the trait of extroversion. So what does this mean? Well, in terms of the 5-factor model, it means that if a person is high in openness, for instance, we would expect them to pair with somebody who is also high in openness. So with this particular trait, when you have somebody who's high in openness to experience paired with somebody who's low in openness to experience, both people typically end up feeling kind of lonely. Now, in terms of extroversion, this means that if a person is extroverted, we don't know who they would end up with. We don't know who they would be attracted to. It could be an extrovert or it could be an introvert. In terms of mental health, we also see positive assortment. For example, we see positive assortment with certain disorders like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, with characteristics like psychoticism, substance use, and antisocial behaviors. So now specifically kind of zeroing in on psychopathy, which is strongly related to antisocial behavior, we see that men who are high in psychopathy tend to rate highly psychopathic women as desirable mothers, and women who are psychopathic have a greater attraction to men who are highly psychopathic for both short-term and long-term relationships. So are people with dark triad traits attracted to other people with dark triad traits? The answer to this question is yes. The strongest positive assortment is with Machiavellianism, then psychopathy, and then narcissism. But all three do see this positive assortment. Another question here would be, what about initial assortment versus convergence? So what does this mean? Well, initial assortment means that the couple came together, but the traits that they had were already present in the beginning of the relationship. Right? So they didn't develop the traits later on. Convergence means that they became more similar over time. So maybe one person was a little bit narcissistic and the other person was a lot narcissistic, and the person with a lower level of narcissistic traits kind of moved toward a more narcissistic position in terms of personality. That's convergence. So which concept kind of wins out here when we talk about two people who are narcissistic? Well, it's initial assortment. However, being around someone who's narcissistic may make it easier to express narcissistic traits. It can serve to normalize that behavior. So in general, people bring the personality constructs, their personality levels, into the relationship. They don't change too much afterward, but they may change a little bit. So both initial assortment and convergence can play a role, but we put more weight on the idea of initial assortment. So what would a relationship between two narcissists really be like? This really also connects to that question about grandiose versus vulnerable narcissism. So let's take a look at those constructs. Both types of narcissism are characterized by a sense of entitlement, self-centeredness, a need for admiration, and being low on the agreeableness trait, so being disagreeable or antagonistic. Grandiose narcissism has characteristics like being high in extroversion, low in neuroticism, being arrogant, socially bold, self-confident, having superficial charm, being resistant to criticism, callous, unemotional, and optimistic. Vulnerable narcissism has characteristics like being low in extroversion, high in neuroticism, tending to be resentful, distrusting, insecure, having a lot of shame, being hypersensitive to criticism, being socially awkward, and pessimistic. So essentially that really leaves us with three combinations if we look at a glance here. Both people in the relationship have grandiose narcissism, both have vulnerable, or one has grandiose and one has vulnerable. Now, narcissistic traits, though, are on a continuum. Many narcissists would be in the middle between grandiose and vulnerable. So I'll add a fourth category here where I'll talk about just general narcissism, the general traits we see with narcissism. Now, as I talk about the subject matter and talk about the two people in the relationship, this can get a little confusing to kind of follow who's who. So just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to refer to one person as person A. Right? One person in this relationship will be person A, and the other person will be person B. It just kind of clarifies a little bit in certain situations. So starting with a couple who are both grandiose narcissists, we see a number of factors of grandiose narcissism that come into play here. Let's start with resistance to criticism. In a sense, both people in this couple are going to be immune from each other's criticism. Both are going to criticize a lot, but again, both will be immune. So in a strange way, imagine being in a relationship where you only hear the good things that your partner says to you, right? So in a way, that can actually be positive. You're not hearing any criticism. You're only hearing what you want to hear. So the relationship may tend to be a little bit more successful, or at least that's how it may appear. Another key characteristic here is the optimism. Both people are going to think that the future is bright, and that's going to contribute to success. We also see high extroversion. This is associated with positive emotions, so both people will tend to have positive feelings. Now, how about the lack of empathy? This actually works a little bit differently. This works against the couple because even though person A would not have empathy for person B, they would expect person B to have empathy for them, right? So this kind of leads to disappointment. The narcissist expects from other people what the narcissist cannot give to other people. Now, another interesting factor here is grandiosity. Person A's grandiosity can actually help person B. It can make person B feel confident in their choice. They chose a winner. They chose somebody who is very important. So during times when person B may feel challenged about their own worth, they can always lean on the belief that they are great because they chose a great person in the person of person A. So they are great by association. So in a sense, the relationship between two grandiose narcissists is a relationship without sensitivity, depth, or complete love, because it lacks true intimacy. The two people live with one another, they represent themselves as a couple, but the relationship is shallow, and in many ways they really function as individuals and not as a couple. Even still, this couple could actually stay together for quite a while and consider the relationship to be healthy in a number of ways. So what about the relationship that has two vulnerable narcissists? Well, here we see two people who criticize each other a lot, and they're very hurt by each other's criticisms. So this is not good. This is not conducive to a positive relationship. Both people here are insecure in the relationship. They never forgive each other. They're pessimistic, and neither are good in social situations. So in this type of relationship, the couple really doesn't have a lot going for them. These relationships are at a moderate risk of failure. Interestingly, though, I've seen exceptions to this, right? Sometimes people are so insecure, even when they're unhappy, they stay together. There's a dependent quality to vulnerable narcissism. If both people are afraid to be alone, who is going to have the courage to leave the relationship? Again, even if both people are really miserable. So these relationships can really go either way in terms of whether or not the couple stays together. So what about a situation where one person's grandiose and the other person's vulnerable in terms of narcissism? So let's say that person A has grandiose traits and person B has vulnerable traits. Well, here we see that person B suffers. They bring chaos to the relationship. They are emotionally unstable. And generally speaking, person A is oblivious to all this. It's more like a nuisance as opposed to a real concern for person A. Person B delivers a lot of criticism, but person A is resistant to criticism. So this couple will argue and fight a lot, but they may stay together even though they consider themselves to be in a dysfunctional relationship. So what about a couple that simply has general narcissistic traits, right? So just looking at this question without looking specifically at grandiose or vulnerable. Well, one of the factors here that would stand out would be the fantasies of success and power. The fantasies can actually help a couple to meet each other's goals because the fantasies may align. And this can actually be a little bit dangerous if the fantasies have a criminal or otherwise harmful component to them. If the fantasies don't align, person A's fantasy may still help person B because person B may invest in the fantasy of person A. Person B could latch on to person A's fantasy. So that fantasy could still reinforce the idea that person B is special. It could give them a sense of power. It could satisfy their need for admiration. So in a sense, person B can live vicariously through person A's fantasy. In the event that person B does not believe or invest in person A's fantasy, person A still benefits because at least person B values the idea of having a fantasy in general, because person B has their own fantasy, so they can appreciate that someone would have those types of fantasies of power, success, and brilliance and all that. So the last item here under narcissistic traits would be the low agreeableness, being disagreeable and antagonistic. All other things being equal, if two people are disagreeable, they're going to argue a lot. They will have trouble coming to a consensus on important decisions, and the constant fighting will take a toll on the relationship. So overall, when two narcissists are together in a romantic relationship, the relationship's success or failure depends on which characteristics we see in each person and how strongly those characteristics manifest. Whether the couple stays together for a long time or they don't, these relationships would not generally be thought of as healthy in a traditional sense. Sometimes they're referred to as toxic. And typically, they do represent a significant challenge for counselors trying to treat the couple. Among the many things that make this challenging would be this idea that each person in this couple would only present goals that help them. So, like in a counseling situation, person A is saying, I want this and that and everything else that helps me, and person B is really saying the same thing, right? All their goals point back to them. So again, you have two people in a relationship in front of you, but the people seem separated, right? Everything in their life is really separate. Separate goals, separate ambitions, separate sets of motivation. Nothing is really joined together. So again, they represent themselves as a couple, but in a lot of ways, two people who are narcissistic aren't really a couple at all. So I know whenever I talk about topics like romance and narcissism, there'll be a variety of opinions, people who agree with me and disagree with me, and have other thoughts on the subject. Please put those opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate a really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of the narcissistic couple to be interesting. Thanks for watching.